I like Tuskegee much better because the emphasis was on teamwork and discipline. That was ingrained in us more than anything else, that you have to be part of a team. It was not about individual recognition. It was about if your comrade was suffering, you had to suffer along with him. If he were being hazed, you had to jump in and be hazed with him. The teamwork and the discipline was the strong points to me of Tuskegee. I miss it today.
Welcome to Triumphant Spirit, America's World War II Generation Speaks. This program is a series of broadcasts featuring the stories of a generation that fought and won the Second World War. No matter how they fought the war or where, on the home front or the battlefield, each veteran featured on the program contributed valiantly to a victory that changed the 20th century. Here are their stories in their own words. They are stories of actions and deeds that not only helped shape the outcome of the war, but the very world we live in today. During the war, for as long as it was, African Americans with pride in themselves and in their country served to the best of their ability on the home front and on the battlefield, fighting racial biases and prejudices in as well as out of uniform. All that served during the war helped advance the cause of racial equality. One unit held in esteem toward the latter part of the war was the famed Tuskegee Airmen group. The group consisted of African American pilots trained at the U.S. Army Air Force's Tuskegee, Alabama Air Base. They were trained for eventual distinguished duty in the Italian theater of war. One of those pilots was Milton Holmes, a 17-year-old African American from Baltimore, Maryland. He graduated as a trained pilot at Tuskegee in 1945.
Well, I lived in a segregated town called Turner Station in Baltimore, Maryland. And I was going to high school, and I was selling the Baltimore African American newspapers, which I read extensively during the war, particularly starting in about 1940. I began selling the papers. I attended Dunbar High School, which was one of three black high schools that were available to us in Baltimore, Maryland. One on the east side, one on the west side, and the vocational school. We had to travel a great distance to go to that school, about 13 miles, and pass other schools. So during the war, I was in high school, and we read a lot about what was going on in the war. After coming out of high school in February, I immediately went to Howard University in Washington, D.C., which at that time was for strictly African Americans. And after leaving Howard University in August, because I got ill, I worked in a defense plant, a manufacturing company. And there, as an African American, we had separate facilities. We had to work on menial jobs. We would work on an assembly line, building barrels to haul oil. So we had a couple of race riots because people objected to our being there. But that's when I found out about an exam. I took an exam to join the ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program. And we were sent to Hampton Institute to be trained as engineers. There was about 86 of us there in the service. And that's how I first got involved in the war. But as a civilian, it was extremely interesting. I got a chance to learn of how the civilians were responding. You had a chance to experience how the women worked so well during the war, for the war effort. In the defense plants, the shipyards, building aircraft, they did heavy-duty work. And because of their earnings like they were doing, they became a good moving force for the country. I began to respect them a little more in terms of the type of work they could do, because most of the time the fathers worked, the males worked, and the women stayed at home. But with the war effort, the women did a lot of work. They did the riveting, they did the lifting, they did a lot of the heavy work, and they did a lot of skill work, they did the welding. So you could appreciate their contribution they made to the war effort. And I began to see the show.
Milton, they're often referred to as Rosie the Riveter. Were these Rosie the Riveters African American as well as Caucasian?
Yes, both worked together in the defense plants. The African Americans did a lot of work in the defense plants. There was a real transformation during the war of the African American female. Before that time, most were housewives or domestics.
What were your feelings about segregated America at that time?
You were almost caught up into the fact that you had to join the service because everybody else was being drafted. Discrimination was
You felt that way as an African American male?
Yes, you felt that with people being drafted and all your friends going to war, you couldn't even form a baseball team, you couldn't form a football team. You had to go somewhere where you could go to school or get some education, get some discipline, and continue to learn. Even though it was in the midst of discrimination, the propaganda was good. The Japs were painted with these different zero eyes and looking like dragons, and the psychology was excellent, making everybody else look bad and we looking so good. And you had to sing your military songs, national anthems. Every day in school we sang the three, the America the Beautiful, but we sang our own black national anthem also, and every day. So you had to learn the patriotic songs, and that was driven into you. And you realize, regardless of the discrimination, that you had to protect your country. Regardless, this was our country, and we had to protect it.
Milton, you remember the famous Tuskegee Airmen group, as I've mentioned before. Could you tell us about the group and when and why it was formed?
The group was formed, as I recall, because the Army at that time, none of the military services rather were allowed to integrate. So we had a separate training facility. In fact, every place I went other than Howard University, Hampton Institute, in the Army Specialized Training Program, we had a separate area that we were trained in. On each base, we had our separate area, separate housing, separate eating facility, separate gymnasium. Our basic training was separate. We had the white officers, but we had the black non-commissioned officers.
White officers were assigned, not
white
black
officers were assigned, right. But we had the separate facilities. And that was, somewhat of a slap in the face, because what they did deliberately was for your non-commissioned officers that trained you, a lot of them couldn't write. So they would read or write, so they would put the educated persons under those black officers who couldn't read or write, and they would, they would harass you and that kind of thing.
When you joined the group, where did you train?
I trained at Tuskegee Air Force Base in Tuskegee, Alabama.
And therefore the name Tuskegee Airmen?
Therefore the name Tuskegee Airmen. I particularly like that training. Having started off at the Army Specialized Training Program at Hampton, which emphasized academic skills, I liked Tuskegee much better because the emphasis was on teamwork and discipline. That was ingrained in us more than anything else, that you have to be part of a team. It was not about individual recognition. It was about, if your comrade was suffering, you had to suffer along with him. If he were being hazed, you had to jump in and be hazed with him. The teamwork and the discipline was the strong points to me of Tuskegee. I miss it today.
Milt, one in uniform, what was the attitude of others in the military toward you and toward the Tuskegee Airmen?
The African Americans looked up to us. And all branches of service, all other enlisted personnel, others looked up to us because it was difficult to get in. I was in Lincoln, Nebraska, about to be shipped out. When I heard about it, when I read about the opportunity to go, I took a screening test at Lincoln, Nebraska, and passed that. Met a group that I was then sent to Keeslerfield, Mississippi, where I had taken basic training first in the Air Corps. I went back for a series of exams. Exams were 5 days in order to qualify for Tuskegee. Arrived there in October of 1944, went back through basic training after taking the exam a second time, and waited to see whether we passed. And it wasn't for about 4 months or 5 months until we were called to go to Tuskegee to enter class. So it was a long wait, waiting to go in. And I think that the people, even at Keesler Field, we were in a separate unit from the other persons in our group. They looked up to us as those potential airmen. They looked up to us because we had taken the series of tests that they couldn't qualify for, and they felt that that we were a little special, and we appreciated that. And you really felt good when you were selected. I mean, that you just couldn't understand the feeling when you got the word that you had passed. In fact, when I got the word, I was home on furlough. And they sent me orders to report to Tuskegee. I cut my furlough short to get to Tuskegee. I was so excited. There was no way in the world I was going to miss going to that class. No way.
Milt, did you face any hazing outside of the military when you were home?
You always face that. I mean, I remember one time coming back from Mississippi to Baltimore. We had to ride on the train. African Americans had to ride on the 2 cars next to the caboose. Since the trains were powered by coal, you rode on the cars where the coal dust would come first. So the only space on the train for me was between 2 cars on the platform. So I laid on that platform for the 12 hours on that train and wouldn't move. I couldn't move. So I stayed on that train. By the time I got off, you wouldn't know me because the soot had covered me from head to toe.
Milt, went into Tuskegee. What type of planes did you fly, and what were their capabilities?
I trained on that plane called a PT-13, which is like a roller coaster in a Great Adventure. It's a two-seater, open cockpit. Your arms can sit on the outside, two wings. And you start the plane by turning the key on and go back out and pull the prop. And you pull the prop to start and get back in. And in those days, you would say to yourself, I may die anyhow, so I may as well get on up here and fly. So you'd get up in that plane, and your instructor would have you to do the spins, the stalls. And you didn't care because it was fun. It was fun, and you appreciated the fact that you could be up in the air flying and training. The school was rougher than flying. The schoolwork, the academics were tremendously difficult. We had a class of 86. I think I stood number 80 out of the 86 in the class. That's why in our group, in the first 5 weeks were we called pre-flight. You were the dog man. Everybody could harass you. The second 5 weeks, you had some lower classmen. We were next to the last class to come to Tuskegee. And I think I was second in command in the second class, in that class. But I enjoyed the experience. Go ahead.
The PT-13 was a trainer.
Trainer.
What type of plane were you ultimately being trained to fly?
We were trained to fly the P-51. P-51. We watched our guys train on that, and we always wondered how we would do if we ever got to it. We admired them for flying. They would come in and tell their tales to us after they harassed us. They would tell all kinds of tales about the instructor supposed to notify anybody if they have a crash, but the instructors will always jump out first and they say, please bail out because the plane's crashing.
What were your most memorable moments during the war?
To me, my experience at Tuskegee was the high point. The character of demanding discipline and teamwork, to me, is necessary for survival. And it teaches me that we must learn how to conciliate with discipline rather than to think about war. The spirit of conciliation and negotiation is more important than the war. The preparedness is necessary. But we did sit around and talk and debate a lot in Tuskegee. And the discipline was very important.
Is there any African American that stands out as an individual that excelled during the course of World War II?
Oh, we all looked up to Benjamin Davis.
Benjamin Davis.
We all looked up to him because he was the head of the airmen. So we always that was a standing name for us, Benjamin Davis Jr.
For our viewers, could you describe who he was?
Well, he was the leader of the Tuskegee Airmen, one of the first pilots out there. So we just respected him. But he had gone before I got there. But he was a legend to us, Benjamin Davis. We knew he had fought strongly for the airmen to be recognized, because one time they wanted to close us down. We all knew that he had fought strongly to keep us active and get us involved. We all knew that, and we felt very strongly about him.
How has the U.S. progressed in fighting discrimination in the military and in society?
In the military, we know that President Truman issued the executive order after some experiments to integrate the military. And I think as a result of that move, African Americans have felt more comfortable being in the military. It's been one of the major employers of African Americans. I think the percentage has increased for blacks, African Americans in the military, even though there has been a lot of complaints of discrimination there. But they felt that that's where they can get training, That's where they can have a steady income, better employment opportunities. A lot of them feel that way when they come out of school, high school particularly, that they'll try to join the military and join in order to get a better education. The military changes direction to me. During World War II, most of us, as I said, were training to be engineers. A few were being pilots, but we were not exposed. You handle the quartermaster, you handle the packages or the goods or the things like that. But at a point at the Battle of the Bulge, I think blacks were first used on the front lines. And I figured then that when the next war came along, things would change, that African Americans would be on the front lines first. And in the Korean War, a lot were lost. And then in the Vietnam War, then it did increase where African Americans were put on the front lines a lot.
Milt, do you feel because of the Battle of the Bulge, the fact that African Americans who are in the rear of the lines many a time were now suddenly on the front lines, improved their fighting capabilities? Because of that, do you believe that's the reason why the American military decided to utilize African Americans on the front line?
Coupled with the fact nobody wants to die. I think people, African Americans and whites, wanted to protect their country equally. And I think we all have a sense of loyalty. And I think people forget that. African Americans feel strongly about this country. We're not going in the West. We're not going to try to move in the West. So this is our country. And if there's going to be any fighting, we want to protect it, but we want a part of the pie also.
But you described how the military has progressed in handling discrimination and prejudice. What about American society?
American society has progressed, but not to me, as rapidly as the military. The systems in the country force segregation. Individuals, people may want to be better, but the systems force segregation. You can start with the educational system. Any system you want, it makes it very difficult for discrimination to be erased. In employment, it's the same thing. In jobs, there's a lot of discrimination. If you want to go by income, the income of African Americans is still not on par. Income of females is still not on par as compared to the males. There will always be discrimination. War helps to eliminate discrimination. There is not much prejudice in a foxhole. We all want to survive. War changes. Peacetime brings it back, except those of us who go to the war realize that I needed a buddy to survive, and survival was regardless of race. Survival was who's my buddy over here that can protect me, which is why I believe in teamwork. That's what I learned from Tuskegee. Teamwork is more important. Teamwork will eliminate discrimination. Good administration will eliminate it.
Milt, you have a paper in front of you that references the Tuskegee Airmen. Could you show that to our viewers and maybe describe what that picture and that article refers to?
This article refers to one of the first classes of Tuskegee Airmen that graduated from Tuskegee, and they're looking at a plane that they're about to fly. And we are proud of that group of graduates. It was very difficult to graduate. You can start a class with about 85 or 100. But by the time you get down to graduate, you're lucky if you have 22 to go all the way through. That's how difficult Tuskegee was.
That training conducted by African American officers as well as white officers?
The training at Tuskegee was conducted primarily by African American officers. And you had African American pilots that were training, African American officers that ran the school, African American teachers that taught the academics, the naval identification, aircraft identification, the Morse code, they taught it all. You had some good pilots that were African American that were training how to fly. But we had one administrator that was white who was excellent in our primary school. But it was primarily run by African Americans.
Milt, do you have any message to relate to today's generation about what you experienced during the war and afterwards?
One thing about war, it makes you change your ideology and accept certain things. During the war, we had pro stations everywhere. You had sex education everywhere. The pro stations were available for condoms and for advice. You had your areas you could go to. Now all of a sudden, nothing is legal. In this country, you had a pro station everywhere. You could go get whatever you needed, the treatment you needed, if you needed any, and you had your special areas you could go for your satisfaction. That's understood in war. In peacetime, we get so religious that we forget the human need. And I think that the country needs to, and we religious leaders need to realize that there are human needs regardless of our ideologies. So therefore, we respect one another and respect that human need, because that's God's gift to us.
Milt, that apparently is your message to the adults. What's the message to the younger generation?
The message to the younger generation would be that the adults have had some experiences that you can learn from. Try not to repeat their mistakes. However, continue to learn and grow and develop some discipline, because discipline is the thing that would help you to survive. And teamwork and respect for others is the best thing that we can have.
And that's an experience that you gained by being one of the famed Tuskegee Airmen.
That's right.
Thank you, Milt.
You're very welcome.